Hello, I am your host, Karen Doyle, and welcome to the Genius Podcast. The Genius Podcast is part of a much bigger initiative for Catholic women called the Genius Project. The heart of the Genius Project is dedicated to equipping and supporting women of all ages and stages of life to discover what it is that God has placed within their hearts to do, giving them the permission to follow that God whisper and dream, and then equipping them with the knowledge and practical skills to make it happen. Over the years, I've often been approached by women seeking advice and mentoring. They want to know how I did what I did and how they could discover what their gifts were, and once they discovered them, how they could use them in a way that brought life and was abundant. They wanted to know how to live their calling. If you are looking to discover what it is that you are called to do with your life, if you have a dream or a passion, but you lack the skills and confidence to take that next step, or you just need some great advice on living your vocation as a Catholic woman, then this podcast is for you. Today's Genius guest is Dr. Carrie Gress. Carrie is a wife, a mother to 5 children, and a very accomplished author. She has a doctorate in philosophy from the Catholic University of America, and her latest book, Theology of Home, is the one that we are going to unpack together in today's podcast. Home is an elegant word. It is a place to live in and feel comfortable, but it's much more than that. Home is where we're nurtured, where we live and where we love. The language of home is universal. It is where we find the eternal in the everyday. But the home is neglected. To millions of women today, there is nothing worse than being seen as a homemaker. But if only they knew the supreme value and reward of giving loved ones a place to call home. Written by 3 wives and mothers, Theology of Home is a simple guide to help reorient all of us toward our true home, heaven. And it offers us an invitation to think purposefully about how to make our homes more nurturing, and ultimately how to lead those who enter our home toward heaven. It's one of the many ways that we express our genius as women. So sit back, relax, and enjoy this conversation with Carrie. Well, Carrie, it's fantastic to have you on the Genius Podcast today. Really grateful for your time, because I know it's evening over there in the US and it's my 9 a.m. So thank you. I'm very excited to share you with our women here in Australia, because I just recently purchased a copy of your book, The Theology of Home, and it's just been beautiful unpacking it. So that's going to be the focus of our conversation today. But I think you and I first connected, I can't remember how long ago it was now, on the Shalom Women series. Do you recall? It was a couple of years ago.
Yeah, I want to say maybe 2 summers ago.
Okay.
It was. I remember so vividly because I actually mixed the dates up for that event and had to scramble. And I think I got ready in 10 minutes and got everything. I was just so grateful we hadn't gone to the pool.
Oh, you did so well.
Oh, goodness. Well, it was definitely the Blessed Mother helping me. Grateful I had something to put on quickly. But,
well, it was so clever, because Shalom was anchoring that program in one city, and then they Zoomed you and I both in, and all 3 of us had this incredible conversation that worked.
Yeah, no, it was really fun. So, yeah. But thank you. It's really lovely to be here. I have never been to Australia, but I have a lot of Australian friends and have a heart for Australians. So it's really a delight to be with you today.
Oh, well, thank you. Maybe we can get you across here one day.
I would love it.
Well, look, we're going to dive into Theology of Home and this idea of what it means to speak of a theology of home. But before we do that, I'm wondering if you'd share a little bit about your background, yourself, and how you came to do what you do.
Yeah, I mean, like all of us, I think this has been a very long journey. I was raised in a pretty lukewarm Catholic family, West Coast in Oregon, and from there, my father passed away actually when I was quite young. And so I was a teenager. And at that stage, I think I had a strong devotion to Mary, though, for whatever reason. I was kind of fascinated by places like Lourdes and Fatima. And that really was, she ended up becoming kind of just this lifeline in my life. Anyway, some women that were all my mother's age when I was in college kind of took me under their wing and I ended up doing Marian consecration with them and really finally just learning my faith more deeply. That was really a big, just transforming point in my life. And so from there, I just kept moving further east. And I lived in Ohio and did a master's degree at Franciscan University of Steubenville that a lot of people are familiar with. And then I went on to do a PhD in philosophy at Catholic University, which is in Washington, D.C. And I lived in Italy for a while, and Poland and France and all these different places, but really all that time soaking up Catholic culture and just fascinated by architecture and art and just going deeper, I think, both spiritually, but also loving just to see the Catholic imprint on stone and brick and buildings. And, when I lived in Rome, I would just walk around and kind of pinch myself almost every day. Like, I can't believe I get to live here and see all of this. So when I got married, my husband, he's American, but we met in Rome and we moved back to the United States and started raising our family here. And I have 5 children. We had 4 very quickly. And then the 5th one just came along 6 months ago.
What's the gap between your youngest of the 4 and then your new baby?
5 years.
Wow. Okay.
Between them. So yeah, I turned 46 and I gave all the baby stuff away. And then 5 months later, he showed up. So.
Somebody in Australia said to us, they had 5 children very close together, and she's in her 50s now, but she refuses to let go of the cot. She said, if I let go of the cot, I'm bound to fall pregnant. So she's holding on to the cot.
Oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I'm not giving away anything anytime soon. I've done that before. So anyway, but my degree was in philosophy, but I quickly learned, I've had a heart for women and for evangelization for a long time, largely because I grew up and lived around people that weren't really devout Catholics. And so I wanted, I had this great passion for it. And I thought, how do I give this to them? Why can I see it? And how do I package it in a way that's compelling to them? And I think that's really a challenge that so many of us have, because the fact that things in the church can feel dated. We St. Augustine, centuries and centuries ago had this great line about how the church is so ancient and yet so new, and Jesus is so ancient and yet so new. And I think we've got the ancient part down in a lot of ways, but we haven't done the new part. We're not necessarily sort of feeling a freshness to our faith all the time. And so that's, I think, what's really been inspiring me significantly over the last 5 years, but probably longer than that. And that 5 years, I really was able to put my finger on it and say, logic and reason just aren't going to do it anymore.
No,
that's not how we reach people. We have to find alternative routes. And so that's been my prayers. Lord, help me find ways to reach the heart of women. And there's no better place than our homes. So that's what we've kind of stumbled upon in this book.
Yeah. Well, it's just really powerful. I've found reading it over the last couple of weeks, it's just so rich. You can read a page and just sit with it for quite a while. And I don't know, it's doing something in my soul anyway. It's just stirring things. I've always been big on creating my home and the atmosphere in my home. So in terms of light and lighting and food and just general order to the home. But this has just taken it to a whole new level, which I'm really, really enjoying it. It's doing something quite powerful. So I love the tagline, Theology of Home, finding the eternal in the everyday.
No, it's the whole project has I think you're right about it. There's something very deep about it because it hits on all of those. It's on so many different areas. And I think especially as Catholics, now I obviously can't speak for the church in Australia, but the church in the United States, we have a lot of kitsch, plastic Jesus imported from China and things like this to give as gifts. And it's hard to find nice Catholic gifts in the US. And I think too that there's between that and then this sort of sense that people feel guilty almost. We've kind of taken on this sort of puritanical sense of fearing the material or feeling guilty about the material.
Yeah.
And not seeing the material as a conduit really, or a way for us to understand the spiritual. And so I think that that's one of the, ideas behind it is recognizing that, yes, we have stuff and yes, we can abuse stuff and we can abuse decorating our home. We can be something that's selfish or narcissistic or self-absorbed or, just to impress the neighbors. But what happens when we look at it as a way to get ourselves and our family members to heaven.
Mm.
Then all of a sudden it comes into a completely different cast. That's really what we wanted to do with this book, was sort of recast the argument, and it in the US, and I'm sure it's this way in Australia too, the home industry is just booming. It's huge.
Yeah.
Billions of dollars are spent on it.
Absolutely.
TV and magazines and on and on. But nobody's really asking the question why. So that's what we really wanted to get to the heart of here was in this book, was why is it that we're so drawn to it? And much of it comes back to this idea that really our homes are meant to be a foretaste of heaven, that they really are meant to help us get to heaven. So I'm not surprised to hear that you have the story. I think we, as authors, have had kind of the same experience, that there's definitely a richness and a lot that is easy to meditate on and kind of resonate. And then the excitement of trying to sort of, how do I make that appear in my home in a way that people feel it and experience it. So
absolutely. I know that my eldest daughter, she's just turned 13, but she was at a friend's house recently and they've got this glamour magazine home. It's amazing. But she came home and she just said, "Oh, Mum, it just feels so cold there." She said, "I love our home because it's warm and you just feel loved when you come in."
Oh, that's so sweet.
It was
you
really
can make that
sweet.
distinction though.
Yes, like what you feel when you walk into an atmosphere. And I think particularly in our modern age, like we are so time pressured and rushing and it's so busy. And I think mums are working, like back in my day, most of the mums didn't work. They stayed at home and there was this art of homemaking. But I do think some of that is lost in the busyness of modern life. And it's quite sad. I know that for myself, when I get busy, and I work as well, but one of the first things to go when I'm under pressure is home. And the laundry builds up, or the clutter builds up, or my desk, the papers pile up, or and I'm a pretty organized, neat person, so but it starts to creep in, and I think that has what happens in the physical does have an impact on us internally, on our souls, on our spirits, and also the people that are living in our home, our children, husbands, and those that visit the home. And it's been really interesting to read the book at a particular season for me, where with COVID and we've just come out of homeschooling, which has been quite interesting, but just all of the interesting is an understatement, but just how things were neglected during that time, like the home. And even on Sunday, my husband said, we really need to look at downstairs and just, spend the week working on the house. And yesterday I went like a crazy Tasmanian devil. There's this little animal from Tasmania who is often portrayed in cartoons. He goes crazy.
I have seen those cartoons.
Okay, so that was me yesterday.
I know the reference. Yeah, that's great.
Woke up yesterday and I just went nuts. And
doesn't it feel so amazing?
Oh, it feels
done and
awesome.
You're going through it, and then you're just bringing all this order. And it's a great feeling, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really good, and it's interiorly, like my mind and my heart feels clearer today.
Yeah,
so
that's exactly right.
Yeah,
there's a levity that comes with it too.
Absolutely.
And actually we just finished our second book, Theology of Home 2, and the title of it is The Spiritual Art of Homemaking. So we're definitely speaking to that a lot more directly in the next book. But I think that's been one of the fun pieces to sort of analyze, is to just look at, we love our homes, but we're especially, I'm sure it's the same there, but here it's like a taboo word to call somebody a homemaker. And so I think that we just want to reclaim that and say, look, if you love the home, it doesn't just happen on its own. It has to have a homemaker. And it's got to be, somebody who can put in the care and the love and the thought behind, and the hard work behind making a home feel like a home. So that's the idea behind it.
There's a beautiful quote in your book from Benjamin Franklin that talks about a house is not really a home unless it has food and fire. And it's not just nourishment for the body, but also the soul. And I think that's what you're picking up on here, just how we nourish the soul and those who enter our home with our presence as women, and then what we're able to create.
Yeah. And we actually, I think that's a great point that has been fun to kind of address since the book came out, because a lot of people ask, I have a lot of children, we homeschool, our house is kind of a mess, I just don't feel, I feel, shy or unprepared, or like I can't really entertain people, or I'm embarrassed when I bring them to my home, or whatever the situation may be. And I'm always kind of fascinated by it, because I know that feeling very well, and have experienced that certainly myself a lot. But I think that one of the things that we forget is just how much of a witness our lives are and our families are. And there's so many people that are single or that don't have this kind of family. And so when they experience it, even in the midst of the mess and the chaos, there's sort of something that they're squeezing out of it and experiencing that they don't experience anywhere else. So I from my own experience, I finally got to the point where, I offer one blanket apology to people when they enter my home and say, I'm sorry for everything that's not right in this house. And then I just have to let it go, because there's, I could go around the whole house apologizing. So, the things are not just so, but there are a lot of things that are speaking to people on a totally different level than just these visuals that we see. And I think that's something to keep in mind.
Yeah, and it reminds me of that scripture, we can speak in tongues and we can do all these things, but if we don't have love, none of it counts. And I think that's it. Yeah. We can have the most picture-perfect home, but if what's happening in that home doesn't contain, that element of love, then it's all for nothing, really. Like the house can look beautiful, but it's really what happened within those walls. So you're right. Like I know growing up, there was a woman who was like a big sister in the Lord, and her house was quite messy and disorganized. But when I walked in there, it was just like, I could exhale. And I just felt so at peace amongst all the chaos. But there was, because it was full of love, it was prayed in, and it was just a really beautiful home. And I think that's a really important thing for us to remember this, because I think, as women, we that comparison trap and perfectionism. But, early on, as most mothers would know, perfectionism and motherhood never align. So you need to get over that very quickly.
Isn't that the truth? Yes, absolutely.
I'm interested, like this mission of the Genius Project that we are doing here is really about helping women discover their purpose and their gifts and activating them. So there's women who are single, there's women who are married, mothers, all kinds of women, different ages and stages in life. So some of these women might not have a home as such, like a physical house. But I'm interested, because you pick up on this in the book, and I know it's something I've meditated on over the years. Home isn't just a building. It's also a sense that we carry within our soul, isn't it? That's a place. It has a deeper meaning and a deeper essence, this idea of home. I'm just wondering if you can flesh that out a little bit more for us.
Sure. Yeah. No, I think that is one of the things that is fun about this is, unless you're homeless, you have a home, you a place where you go, and it's not unimportant. And I think, even more so now we appreciate this. And so we do, try to address single people, and a lot of these things are just kind of universal principles, and they apply to everybody, whether you're working or not, or you stay at home or what have you. But there is that recognition, of course, just the connection that we have, with the church, and with this idea of transcendentals, which we talk about a little bit in the book, but I don't not in deeply philosophical terms. But if you think about the things that happen in our homes, they're the same things that also happen really at church. We're nourished, we're forgiven, we feel safe, we're comforted. There's light there. All of it. There's order there. All these kinds of things sort of map onto that, but they also map onto heaven. So it's these same concepts really extend themselves throughout our lived experience of our home, and then our spiritual home, and then our eternal home, really. So it's those kinds of things I think we often can be too utilitarian about, and think, okay, this is just the place where I sleep at night, and I'm microwaving a meal and what have you. But there's something much deeper that can happen, even if we're inviting a friend over for dinner one night, or a group of friends gets together. I know of one young man that before COVID, he and a group of friends would get together at the same restaurant, like every Wednesday night or something, just for that sense of community and that sense of being home with others. You can also find that sense of home. My co-author Noelle talks a lot about this, that she had that sense of home with her husband when she met him. She felt like she was finally at home, and really her holidays changed from spending them with her parents to then wanting to just be with him. So I think there's so many different facets and levels and layers to all of this, but it's important to sort of get out of that merely utilitarian, very practical notion of this is just, the place where my clothes hang in the closet and I shower. There's a lot more dynamism going on there. And that's one of the reasons too, why we talk so much about, especially just even without words, that the pictures themselves are important. Talking about how our homes should remind us of the saints and of God who's always with us, and just trying to live our lives in accord with God's will. And some of that, just we need the visual reminders of beauty.
And I love you picked up on this with the transcendentals, but some people aren't familiar with what they are, and they are truth, beauty, and goodness. And that is the nature and the heart of God, is truth, beauty, goodness. And that's what we're talking about, that the power of beauty, the power of truth, the power of goodness to draw you out of yourselves, and I guess reorient your focus on the Lord is very powerful. Like when we look at a sunset, like we're drawn beyond ourselves and we are captivated by the beauty of the sunset. I think when you listen to a really gifted speaker and they're really preaching truth, again, something deep in your soul connects with that truth. When we encounter someone who is really good at their core and selfless. So the transcendentals of truth, beauty, and goodness are incredibly powerful. And I think when we're talking about this theology of home, and as I'm reading your book, even the visuals, the way it's laid out, the truth, beauty, and goodness just flows out of the book. I think that's why it's so captivating, because it's in your words, but it's in the layout, it's in the design. Something captivates the soul.
Right. And that's very purposeful. In fact, I've spent a lot of time kind of looking at the culture in my previous book called The Anti-Mary Exposed. I really looked at what has destroyed our culture. And it's really, much of it has had to do with things like magazines. If you look at the messaging in magazines, they have these incredible visuals that so many of us are drawn to. I love a good magazine with pages and beautiful visuals and all of that. And they know that, this group of women that is trying to spread different ideas that are but are really disastrous to culture. They're doing it through these visuals. They're enticing us visually. So of course my idea was, well, why can't we reverse that? Why can't we show, even in these pictures, we sort of show taboo things like dads being good dads and doing manly things. There's a great series of photos of one of our friends chopping wood, and being with children. We show a lot of children and big families. These are not things that women are used to seeing really in magazines. And yet we're getting all of these sort of Marxist ideas and ideas from people like Margaret Sanger. But it's not because women are reading those books, it's because they're reading the magazine. So I really wanted to turn that on its head and recognize and appreciate the fact that we love this kind of format. And, I remember when I had very small children and was incredibly, stressed out, feeling all that juggling of 4 kids under the age of 5. And, my big break was the 20 minutes I got to sit in silence, thumbing through a magazine. So this was kind of building off of that idea, was how do we use these things that women love, but convey powerful message. And I like what you were saying earlier about the transcendentals as well, because what the distinction you made really was the difference between luxury and beauty. And I think that's one of our stumbling points too, is we equate some of the money that we might spend on our homes with luxury. And instead we need to look at it with beauty. Luxury is one of those things that's turned in upon itself, like you were referring to the sunset. Beauty is what turns us outside of ourselves. So I think that can be a great way for us to sort of discern, how do we spend our money? Obviously within our means. Some of us, it's not really a priority, or there's other things that we would rather focus on as well. So it's always one of those things that has to be discerned by each individual. But I think that looking at it in terms of beauty and not just luxury or comparing ourselves with others makes it a much more easy task to figure out what it is that we would like to do with our money and resources and time.
I really like that distinction the word luxury and the word, I like how you say luxury. Say it again.
Luxury?
You said very Aussie-like there.
Oh, no. Well, I have to apologize. I'm one of those people, I pick up accents from other people really easily.
Fantastic.
And I love the Australian accent. It's very bouncy.
Yeah, someone said, "Oh, I like your accent." I'm like, "Oh, do we have an accent?"
Very joyful. It's a very joyful accent, actually. So.
Well, I have this beautiful friend, and she's from Poland, but then she sort of left Poland late teens and spent many years in the UK, and her husband and 3 kids moved to Australia about 6 or 7 years ago. And she's got this mix between this Polish, this British, and now this Aussie accent.
I can only imagine.
Oh, she's
darling.
Gorgeous. Oh, no, it's so lovely. Yeah.
Oh, that's so sweet. That's so great.
Anyway, that's off topic. But
yes.
I like that distinction between luxury and beauty, because I do think people get really caught up. We can go to either extreme in life. So we can feel like we have to be really, really humble, but that actually becomes, inverted pride. It can be. And an obsession with being humble is actually unhealthy. Whereas, that other extreme you talk about is luxury and being obsessed over material possessions. But there's something in the middle there in that area of beauty, which I think is really important. And you do a really beautiful job in the book of breaking, I guess, the theology of home into 3 separate parts. And I like structure. It's the way I work. So I think, if I can see a structure, I don't know, you connect with it and it tends to stay with you. And so,
good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah.
And so I thought it might be helpful to unpack these 3 parts. Part 1, you talk about the essentials, part 2, the elements, and part 3, beyond the walls. And I'm just wondering if we can dive into looking at a couple of those. And I know that in the elements you've got a lot, but let's start with part 1, looking at the essentials of the theology of home.
Yeah, I think this part was really vital for just laying out, why are we using this word theology at all with the home, to really underscore that, again, that there's something in our homes that is really this foretaste of heaven. And, the whole idea of it came to me when I was actually on my treadmill, where I do some of my best ideas come from the treadmill, but
they do.
I was, it was great. But I was just thinking, our whole goal is really just to get ourselves and get everyone that we know and love to heaven, to get them home. And from there, it just kind of, the idea is just kind of rushed in. And I started realizing that how connected our homes really are to this concept of heaven. And we can also see, of course, the opposite of that they could certainly be a very hell-like place, a hellish place. And then they're not neutral. They're not meant to be neutral, but in fact, they're meant to do much more than I think what we expect of them on a practical level. So it was really just a recognition of that, looking at Scripture, the first chapter in particular, looking at Scripture and even that notion of the prodigal son. What does the prodigal son do? He goes home to his father's house. All these kinds of ideas. Even, when we pray, we go into our room and close the door. That Scripture passage. Well, you could do that physically, or you could do that just in your heart as well. So there's all these elements of Scripture that we really wanted to draw people's attention to help them understand, why the home has this sense, and why it is we all have this longing for kind of a perfect home, or a sense of them as sanctuaries, that God has placed that in our hearts because we have this desire for heaven. So that was really the first chapter. And then we moved on to this concept of remembering, and looking at the Mass in particular. In fact, it was really interesting doing research on this chapter because of the fact that I looked at the history of Judaism, and something like the Passover meal, it wasn't considered something that they were just remembering, but it was in fact taking part in the actual Passover meal when it happened in Egypt for the Jews. And this is the way we think of the Catholic Mass as well, that we're not just remembering Christ, but we're taking part in the unbloody sacrifice of the Mass.
Yes.
So it was interesting to sort of draw all of those pieces together, and again look more at the connection between the actual church and the domestic church, and how those are kind of related. And then the third chapter was really about building, and this chapter is kind of looks at evangelization. And even in the preface, we have this great line that one of the women wrote about how we may not be able to get our friends into church, we can certainly get them into our kitchens.
Yes.
We'd have them over for
Yes.
dinner. But I love this idea of sort of building, there's something so tantalizing about, an Italian villa that's been growing grapes for centuries, or olive oil, or, whatever. There's something about the land and the farming aspect and the finished product and the family and, all those years of history that have been passed down. And I think that, something we all would love to sort of have on a certain level. But I think, again, that also plays into what we're building in the church and what we're doing with, certainly on a spiritual level, but all those spiritual pieces trickle down into material. And so this is why we find these kinds of beautiful families. I mean, obviously not without their imperfections, but within countries that have been Catholic, like Italy and France and whatnot, because there is that sense of family and passing things down, especially the faith, and how the faith really informs all of those pieces. So
absolutely,
that was kind of the meat of the book in terms of just kind of laying it out.
So when you were talking about just that idea of homecoming, and you mentioned the prodigal son, I don't know, have you ever read Henry Nouwen's book, The Return of the Prodigal Son?
I don't think I have read that one.
Oh, it's beautiful. I read it quite a few years ago, but he talks about this idea. So he's done an abridged version. It's called Home Tonight. And he speaks about this idea of home, and that our whole lives are a leaving and returning to this sense of home. So our faith journey, even as children growing up to become adults, like we grow up and we leave the family home, but we come back to visit. But he talks about in the spiritual life how our whole spiritual life is a constant series of homecomings back to the Lord, and back to a sense of who we are in the Lord. And I really love that. I have to send you a copy of the book because
I'll buy it. Don't worry about sending me. I'll find it because it sounds really beautiful, and certainly related very closely to what we've written about.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I know many years ago, Jonathan actually had a copy on his bedside table, and we were going on a holiday, and I realized I packed everything apart from my books for the holiday, for my reading material. And I ran into our room, and it was on his bedside table, and I just picked it up, and along with John Grisham and someone else. So it was an interesting combination of holiday reading. But so I'd read John Grisham in 24 hours, and then I was left with Henry Nouwen's book. And oh my goodness, I spent the next 9 months just with that one book, meditating on it. And
that's amazing.
All of his reflections are based on the painting, the Rembrandt painting, The Prodigal Son.
Right. I know the painting well.
Yeah. Well, I always found it a really depressing image. It was dark colours, and I love art. So I just found it quite depressing. But after reading his book, and there's a picture of the painting in the back of his book, so the idea is just to meditate on it, that we actually are that younger son, and we're falling into the arms of the Father, this homecoming into the Father's love. And it just had a huge impact on my life. And I just encourage people to read it.
Yeah.
And I think so much of what you're talking about here, the essentials, require us to slow down and to create some time and space to create this idea of home. I've witnessed time and again, and I'm sure you have too, people who have not had the experience of home, a physical home, of that unconditional love of a mother and a father, and haven't been raised with, I guess, home being a safe place or a place they wanted to be. And what I've witnessed in them is that they do spend a lot of their adult years sort of wandering, searching for a sense of home. This sense that when people are not given a sense of home, they do spend their lives wandering around looking for it. I think tying into that idea of Henry Nouwen's idea of homecoming, that even if we haven't experienced that, even if we haven't internalized that in our own homes as children and teens, that we can experience that in relationship with the Lord, this spiritual homecoming, that then allows us to create it, I guess, for family.
Yeah, no, I think that's incredibly beautiful. And I think that's absolutely right. There is this sense of wandering. And of course, the wandering is because they don't know themselves. They don't know who they are. And that's really what home does, is it affirms, both reveals and affirms who we are in the unconditional, but also within those relationships that we have with other people. So if you don't have those, then it's very hard to replicate that except through through the Father and coming to know Him in a real way. So yeah, thank you for laying that out. It's beautiful.
A sense of identity, isn't it, that we get from home. So it's not just a house. It's not
it is
shove this food in the child's mouth and get this homework done.
Right. Yeah. So there's so much more going on there. And, that's one of the fascinating things too, is I think much of it feels sort of invisible. How is this happening and who is doing this? And, one of the biggest mistakes, of course, that radical feminism made in the ideology was just to think that, children just raise themselves. They just are brought up without anybody. And I think that we're really seeing the fallout from that in terms of the way people feel and, emotionally and, all those struggles, like you said, that kind of wandering. I know there was a piece a couple of years ago in a magazine I was thumbing through, and it talked about how people felt more at home in their cars than they did in their own homes. So I thought that was really telling as well. There's that isolation, but you also have sort of a limited space, but you're also wandering, you're always just moving in your car. That's kind of the idea. So it ties back into your concepts as well.
Yes. And I think what you picked up on there, just about the emotional world, like and how it's invisible, like particularly as mothers, like we raise our children day in, day out. So much of it is thankless. And some days, my daughter turned 13 and she's beautiful. We're really blessed. But, you get a little bit of attitude sometimes from the kids as they're growing up, and you think, oh, my goodness. But I know for her, just watching her over this year, she started high school, and obviously, there's always the friendship things with girls. And Jonathan would laugh saying, I'm down to the counselling room, the girls' bedrooms at night, because we're and just their need to talk it out. And some nights I'd be so frustrated, and I could easily palm it to Jonathan and let him put them to bed. But just, I guess, building their emotional scaffolding to understand their world and teaching them emotional intelligence, because you can get the best academic score in the country, but if you don't have emotional intelligence, you really don't have a lot. And I'm seeing that with my children's friends only now as they're hitting high school years, because we had 3 kids in 3 years, so they're all going to hit this season at the same time. But I see that all those years of conversations on the end of the bed at night are actually starting to pay off, and it's encouraging, because a lot of their friends just don't have that. They just don't understand their own emotional world, because mum's busy, like mum's getting home from work at 7 p.m. or 7:30, or the babysitter's there, or big siblings there. And I think as mums, we need to be reminded just of the importance of our presence. And it's so easy to lose sight of that, because we get affirmation and we get valued in what we're doing with work. We don't see it. But I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we're sowing seeds that will take years to grow and to flourish and bloom.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And that I think is the rub that we all sort of struggle with in terms of,
absolutely.
Sometimes it's not even just the reward. Sometimes it's just things that we have to do and have to get done.
Absolutely.
And yet it is important to just sit and listen. And I think that's been one of my frustrations with motherhood is, I don't have the answer for your problem. No. And I finally had to realize, like, I don't need to have an answer. I just need to listen to her.
So in part 2 of the book, you dive in to look at the elements, and you talk about different things like light, nourishment, safety, water, comfort, hospitality. Can you, I guess, in terms of when you wrote this chapter, like, what is some of the most important ones for you there, of elements of creating a sense of home?
Goodness. I mean, I think that's kind of the fun thing is it was really easy to write because there were so many fun examples and things to think about. I become fascinated with this concept of light. I studied medieval philosophy, and medieval philosophy focuses a lot on light and the concept of it, and tying together the material and the spiritual. And there's just a lot of really beautiful work that people like St. Thomas Aquinas and Duns Scotus and all these different philosophers did on light. And I spent a lot of time with that in relationship to aesthetics and art and beauty. But I think too, just thinking of it on a spiritual level, even we can think about how when we're grumpy, we're sort of a dark personality. Everybody's sort of walking on pins and needles around us, and how that can be, or if we're feeling more joyful, there's a lightness and a levity that comes into our homes, to our moods. I recently talked to an 80-year-old woman that she has 67 grandchildren, and she's featured in our next book. That was one of the things that she talked about, was just how she realized that she couldn't give in to her emotions the way that she had been, and that she had to do a better job of controlling her anger and whatnot, because of the fact that it really affected the family and so many levels. So light is an amazing one, but I also think it's just a fascinating concept because of our seasons and the way that it can hit different rooms and different paint and lamps versus natural light, and what about at night and all of that. It's a really fun concept to talk about. But then, of course, so is nourishment. I mean, what do we love more than an amazing feast in front of us? And yet it's not really necessarily just about the feast. It's about those conversations that happen at the table and whatnot.
Some people, it just doesn't come naturally to.
Yes.
To create.
Yeah. And I am one of those people that doesn't come naturally to me. So I can certainly appreciate that. There was this brand when I was growing up called Garanimals, and you matched up a shirt that had one animal, and with the pants it went with another animal, and that's how you knew they matched.
Yes.
And I feel like I'm kind of that way as an adult. I've got some beautiful art from Europe when I lived over there in different places, but by and large, I'm just not very creative. And so it's been a funny, my co-author Noelle Merring is such a great stylist, and so I think we complement each other well. But I have a deep appreciation for people that it doesn't come naturally to, because that's not where all of our gifts are, for sure.
No, and I think that's what's so beautiful about part 2 here, where you're actually unpacking the elements and what that means. So it's like a manual in some ways for people who might not know how to do that but want to. But it's a manual that I guess helps people along the way. And
that's a good way to look at it, because I think Marie Kondo has obviously been very popular, but that I think that's sort of one aspect. That's sort of the order aspect that we talk about to a certain degree, but it doesn't really get into these deeper elements of how do we help craft souls and help mold them and nourish them and raise them well. Instead of merely providing for them, on a material level.
Yeah, absolutely. And then part 3, you're looking at beyond the walls. So share with me a little bit about what made you put that part in.
Actually, it was really interesting. We had, there's one part that we talk about, leaving home and working. That's one level. And certainly our husbands working and outside the home, many of them. And sort of that dynamic of, is all of our work at home to serve his job, or kind of vice versa? And there's so many great quotes and things, like from C.S. Lewis. I know we have a lovely one about, how it's really the outside work is meant to serve the home. I mean, if our final goal really is to get everybody to heaven, then it certainly makes sense that that's where the service needs to be focused on. But then we also actually it was interesting too to even look at, what happens when our children leave home, what happens when we leave home, what, all these aspects of and stages of our lives, whether it's hospital for our final days and whatnot. We have this model of Our Lady as a homemaker, and this is what talking about the genius that women have is that capacity to sort of foresee things and know the direction it's going, and try to sort of head it off the past to make sure that people aren't embarrassed or they're not uncomfortable. And even a friend of mine took a course on etiquette years ago, and she said the prime reason that this course taught her, the prime reason we have etiquette is so that people feel comfortable. It's all about making people feel comfortable. It's not about making them feel left out or awkward. And I obviously that too can be corrupted, but I just love that concept of this we want in our homes when we bring people in. But that's also, again, where we affirm people and we recognize them, is in that level where they can let their guard down, where they can feel free to laugh and engage and tell stories and drink a glass or two of wine and just really, let their hair down. So I think those are important things.
And I think you use the word a homemaker puts somebody at ease in the book, that word at ease, where people, like you said, can just be. And I think that's That's really beautiful. I love what you were saying just about how you have to do another book because you haven't done enough recently. I don't know that if the listeners realize this, but you've just released 3 books, haven't you, in a very short space of time?
Oh, there's actually a little more than that. It is actually my eighth book.
8, okay. Of course it is.
So, yeah. And I did a dissertation before that. So yeah, I'm kind of booked out right now, actually. So I'm taking a little break.
Good.
Yeah, it's been fun. We've actually dove into candle making. We've been making these beautiful soy candles that I
saw those. They're beautiful.
Yeah, thank you. Marian themed and sacraments of the church and whatnot. But yeah, it's been fun to sort of do something totally different. But I'm a firm believer, again, that this evangelization is not rational. It's not logical.
No.
So something like our candles that smell like the chrism oil, it's a very powerful thing, especially if you get it blessed. It's just a great evangelical tool, I think, to give to people that are either away from the church or struggling, or for those of us who are just trying to enrich our faith at home. So I've been looking for a lot of ways of how do we do this on the material level, where we help bring back kind of this freshness of Catholicism into our daily lives too.
Oh, well, look, thank you. I am looking forward to finishing this book. And I've also got, just let me know, there's a couple on Mary that you've written recently, which also tie into this. So can you just tell us very quickly as we wrap up just about those books?
Yeah. The first one on Mary that I wrote was called The Marian Option. And there was a big trend, a big book in U.S. called Option that was basically talking about, how do we deal with the culture that we're in? And so I looked at the problems of the culture and saw, yes, we have these great saints that have dealt with them, but Our Lady has dealt with them much better throughout the ages. Yeah. And so it's kind of a big picture look at all the things that she's done historically in different ways to help Christians. And then the second one actually came out of the first one. That it's called The Anti-Mary Exposed, Rescuing the Culture from Toxic Femininity. And I just got a lovely letter actually from a woman in Australia who read the book, and it was really beautiful. It was, one of those tear-jerking, moments when I realized all this blood, sweat, and tears is really worth it.
It's worth it.
Because it's changing people's lives. But in any event, it talks a lot about the culture that we've been living in and how, the culture isn't just sort of sidestepped who Our Lady is, but really contrary to it. And we can see this especially with the emphasis on anything but virginity and motherhood. And of course, Our Lady is the Virgin Mother. So those are typically the ways through which women really found their sanctification. So it would make sense that an anti-Marian spirit in the world would try to erase those. That's really what we've been living through. And so I brought that to light. So this book then, of course, came out of that because I realized, we need to start really reaching people in these places where they live emotionally and even in their thoughts. And and I started doing projects like this. I thought they were so fun. I felt guilty. Like, I can't believe I'm dabbling in all these fun concepts. And our website, actually, theologyofhome.com, was kind of one of these where a lot of this came from, because I was doing some of the fun stuff. And then I realized, this is actually where women spend their time, and where we should spend much of our time is thinking about these kinds of things. So why are we as Catholics sort of making it too intellectual or too hard to enter into on a day-to-day basis? So so that's kind of been the mission. I think.
Well, you do it so well. It's clearly your genius zone, your area, because you have a beautiful way with written word and just expressing thoughts that is just really beautiful. So thank you so much. Now, just in wrapping up, could you please offer the women a challenge for the coming week?
I thought about this a lot, but when it came back to, of course, the 5 different elements that we have in our book. I'm going to list them again. Light, or actually, I think there's 6 of them now. Light, nourishment, safety, order, comfort, and hospitality. And it just struck me that women could take one of those, or even think about the bulk of them, and just kind of meditate on them, about how they integrate those into their daily life. And maybe if there's an area where they could improve upon, whether it's, with their children, with their husband, with people that they need to be hospitable towards. There's so many challenges, of course, now that we're all at home. But how do we kind of change the direction from feeling kind of the abrasiveness of these challenging times to then having it be something where we're improving each other through it, improving our homes, improving our communication or whatnot. So it seems like they're all, of course, it could be something as simple as buying a new lamp, or it could be something as, more elevated, like how do I be more cheerful, or how do I bring God's light more into our life as well. So anyway, all of these things can be thought about on those different levels. So I would just challenge them to think about those in those different layers and in their own homes.
Fantastic. Well, I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Carrie Gress. If you would like to order a copy of her book, please visit the website theologyofhome.com and follow her on Instagram. Over the next 2 weeks, the Genius Project will be launching a number of new online courses to support Catholic women discover their unique genius and the many ways in which that genius can be expressed and offered as a gift. Until then, have a beautiful week and God bless you.